Ah, Staying Alive. Isn't that a nice song there, Mr. Armstrong?
It is a little before my time, but still a
Yep.
good song.
Well, I was born then, so I remember that song. So here we are tonight. I'm here with Mr. Armstrong down in Dublin City Schools. This is Mr. Holman up at Beechwood. And we're going to go over computer side chat number 3 on the Middle Ages web quest dealing with feudalism and government. So I want to get us started with our driving questions and our flashback to Rome, Mr. Armstrong.
Yeah, so this evening we're going to start, this computer side chat's going to address 5 major questions as we go through. So first question is, why do we need government? Second is, what is feudalism? How were kingdoms organized? What is a manualism system and how did it work? And then how do specialization and interdependence affect the feudal system? And in order for us to start with this, we need to take a little quick flashback to Rome and kind of talk about how the influence or how Rome was set up. Rome had a strong government, was very organized, great society, had laws and order that provided protection and safety for the people living throughout Western Europe. So when that system collapses, that's what really sets the stage for what we're going to talk about today with feudalism and government.
So one of the key answers about why do we need government is actually when the Visigoths and these other groups invade Rome and Rome falls, we begin to realize that we need government to provide structure, to organize our lives, to give us safety. Maybe the most important thing is to provide safety and organization to the world we live in. So let's move on and let's take a look at how feudalism works and what it's all about. So feudalism is a definition, and we're going to just take it directly from it, basically a dictionary. Here's what it is. It's a system of government. And the key word there I think we need to look at is the word government. So if you want to highlight that there, Mr. Armstrong, great. Government's the key idea. So it's a system of government that develops during the Middle Ages where the nobles offer protection and land. A land is called fief, and we'll see that in a few minutes, in return for service. Usually it's military service, but it could also be, it could also be the peasants providing food. So there's other kinds of service, but there is this idea that there's a loyalty in feudalism. You pledge loyalty to someone, and with the idea of chivalry and living a life of honor and trust, you need to fulfill that service. So feudalism is a form of government that's really based on trust. You want to add anything there?
No, I think that covers it. Then we'll talk a little bit more here in a bit about the taxes and how that plays a role, and we'll get into the role of the church. Maybe briefly talk about that to set the stage for later quests.
Yeah, and I think the kids can see in there, we've got fief, we got loyalty, we got tax, we got peasants, we got interdependence, all these key words we've already kind of started to address or appearing up in that thing. So without all those ideas, you don't really have feudalism. So it's the whole structure of society, how society is going to work. It's the organization of society. So let's move on.
All right, so we talked about this already some in class. We did a simulation where we acted some of this out. So the hierarchy or the social order of the social classes at this point should be reviewed. You got the king at the top, and then you've got the high nobility or lords, knights, and then the 3 different types of peasants, artisans, freemen, and serfs.
But all of those are peasants, right? Doesn't matter if you're an artisan or you're a freedman, you're still a peasant. We need to make sure kids keep that in mind.
Yep. So do you have anything else to add here? Oh, I suppose maybe one thing to kind of mention again is artisans have specialized or they're skilled workers, so they would be blacksmiths, goldsmiths, swordsmiths, those types of things. So yeah.
Usually someone who works with their hands. Most of the kids get that because we had our coronation recently, and they saw people that created the crowns and the sword of mercy and the regalia. So we're good there. We do want to take a quick moment and look at the triangle to the left, because most of us probably haven't discussed this yet. But we will highlight very quickly, there is one pope. Okay, there's one pope in Europe. Now, at one point, there'll be three. We'll get into that much later in the Middle Ages. But in general, there's one person that's pope. Archbishops are probably not as important in the Middle Ages. Bishops tended to be the next most important, and they found themselves in major cities. Those were the people that did the coronations in our class were bishops. And then there are thousands of priests. There are thousands and thousands of priests, right? And each village has a priest. So there's one pope, but there's thousands of priests. But all of them represent God here on earth. And we'll continue to talk about that as we progress through the Middle Ages. So I think it's enough on the social hierarchy. Most of the kids get it.
Yep. All right, so moving on to the next. What you see here is the division of land. So the image on the left side is three different countries. And we're going to focus in on one. So we'll focus in on this one in a minute. But as you can see, maybe I got a little ahead of myself. As you can see on the image to the right, all the different kingdoms that exist throughout Europe. Each different color represents a kingdom. So as you can see, there are a great deal of them. So yeah, is there anything to add there, Mr. Holm?
Well, you know, in Beechwood, actually, we have 6 kingdoms, right? I have 6 periods. Each class has a king. So we have 6 periods in there. If you look at the map of Europe, there are tons and tons. So we can just kind of check them off. There's all these kingdoms everywhere, all over Europe, and there's multiple kingdoms in all these places. So it's hard, you know, feudalism gets real difficult until you begin to understand how that really works. But we could continue to label more and more kingdoms. They're everywhere. What we're going to do is blow up England, and we're going to take a look at this picture a little more in detail. But we'll suffice to start with, there's 3 kings that sit in England, or in what we would call England today. And then we'll go to the next slide and try to break that down a little more. So there's 3 kings of England, or in the English region, we should say, because that's Wales and Scotland, et cetera, and Ireland. But if we go to the next slide, I think they'll see a little bit deeper. When you look at the one image, though, and you try to focus on one, we picked a king in our classes. So there's one king. And that king proceeded to divide their land. And they gave a noble what was called a fief. Fief. So we've got multiple nobles. And each noble controls the land. And their job is to protect the king from anybody trying to invade him. So anybody trying to come in, as the arrow appears, anybody trying to get in has to go through the noble force first. Their job is to protect the king. But you'll notice this last noble up at the top, this guy, he then proceeded to give land to multiple knights, okay, which is what we did in class. We elected knights for each class. So you begin to see that all of these nobles probably would end up dividing their land and giving a chunk to a knight. So I'm dividing this one, and we might see more knights appear, right? So you would have other knights appear. But this kind of gives you a breakdown of how a kingdom works. So I don't know if you go back to the next page real quick. If you go back a page, actually. Didn't take.
There we go.
There we go. If you look at all those kingdoms, how many nobles are there? And how many knights are there? You know, there's could be thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of knights in Europe right now. So we can go forward. But I just wanted you to think about that again, about how many kings there are in all these little kingdoms that appear all over the map of Europe. And then you might want to talk a little bit about the next slide. Once we've divided our land, we've given our fiefs, we have knights and nobles controlling the land, which basically surround the king from invasion from any direction, you know. And if they were invaded from the south, all the knights would come to protect the king from that angle. That's the oath you take.
Right, and I think it's important to remind the students that each piece of land, whether we're talking about the knights or the noble or the king, each fief would have peasants on it, would have members of the church on it, and would have all of these different things located. So we'll zoom in even further and look at what one of the manors would look like. A manor is the part of the piece of land, the fief that was given down from, say, the king to the noble, or from the noble to the knight. So as you can see, we've got the peasants who are working the land. They would live in these huts and so forth. You've got the manor house, and when this is where the knight or the king would be located. The manor houses, depending on how wealthy the lord was, the manor house could look more like a castle, or it could just look like, kind of what it does in this image. So this is probably a better representation of what a knight's manor house would look like. We've got some other features. We've got the church located here. We've got the water mill that's used to break grain, to make bread. We've got the source of water, and so on. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, because you guys will be able to read about this and talk and look at the other parts of it, unless you think there's something that we need to.
I put it out. There's probably a blacksmith there. That's probably a blacksmith if you go in deeper and look. But there's where one of those thousands of priests would be. Every manor is going to have one priest there that runs the religious life of that town and that community. So if you just take a look over here, this knight has a priest, and this one has a priest, and all these little things are going to have multiple priests in all these little neighborhoods over on the other map. So there's tons of priests throughout Europe, and in this case, where the king is probably a bishop. So the Pope would be in Rome. So I'm just kind of clarifying that a little bit for kids. But yep, that's pretty much, I think, the idea of what a manor might look like. And we're going to see other images of manors, and they're going to find others as they're doing their work in Quest 3.
Okay. So this is just another picture of a manor. We're going to be pushing some time here, so we'll just kind of skip through this a little bit.
Let me just ask one quick question. I wonder, the kids, by looking at that, could you tell that this is not a knight's castle or a knight's manor? Is there a difference about the building? Hopefully they see that pretty clearly and say, wait a sec, that's not like it was on the last one. So there's a wall.
And hopefully they notice some of the physical features of the geography that help them come to that conclusion as well.
Yes. Yeah, but here's one thing we will point out. I think we thought we would mention right here, because kids might not find this too first, and that is this 3-crop rotation, which they should learn a little bit about. Now, it might not come until later quests, but that becomes a really important idea during the Middle Ages, is the 3-crop rotation, and they can learn a little bit more about that on Quest 4, I think it is. So we can move on with time.
All right. You go ahead and take the lead, and I'll do the writing for you.
Okay, well, interdependence is the idea that we need people to survive. So, when you're a little kid, you are interdependent upon your parents. You need them, but your parents need you too. Once they have you, there's love. There's all these things that they need from you. They look for you for things. But in the Middle Ages, you had people that needed each other to survive. The whole system would fall apart if we were missing one group of people. So, for example, if we didn't have the knights, there would be no warriors, and therefore the society wouldn't be able to fend off anybody who wanted to invade. So interdependency is this idea that we need each other. So these little graphs are going to show us how we were interdependent upon each other. So you want to explain the first graph?
Yeah, so the king, so the first graph down here, the king gives a fief of land, the manor, to a noble. In return, the noble gives the king protection, loyalty, whoops, I can't spell, protection, loyalty, and then also pays taxes and some of those things. So do you want to take the next one?
Well, I'll take a quick point there. One reason we need government, we need protection. So then your noble who got the fief or fief of land from the king would turn around and give a piece of that land to a knight. So they're also providing land. Now remember, land in the Middle Ages is a lot like money. We're really talking about money when we look at this. Land becomes the money. When he gives the land to the knight's job in return is to provide protection. So we just can drag protection up. You should have copied it and moved it up. But you can just bring protection up. It's the knight's job to defend the noble and to protect the noble and to protect his larger manor. If the king needs protecting, then this knight has to come to the aid of the king as well. And that's because the king, ultimately, this knight owes loyalty to the king, right? He got his land from the noble who got his land from the king. So there is this loyalty that carries through the hierarchy. And that takes you to the last group. And maybe the last group's the most important. Without this group, the whole system falls apart. This is where the interdependence comes. You know, the knights didn't really give land, although we have the word gives in there. They did give shelter. I don't know if they gave land to farm, but they leased land to them in a sense. They allowed them to use the land to farm. And the peasants in return provided the food.
Yeah, I think, yeah, do you see on your, I think on the iPad it doesn't show farm here, but
the food, that whole idea of interdependence. Without the peasants, the knight can't study military or war and figure out how to fight. Therefore, they're because the peasant needs the knight to protect them so that they can continue to do their job and farm. And you'll see interdependence as you go through this in many, many ways when you look at people and what's going on in the Middle Ages. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, is there one more slide? Do we have the slide in about rights and responsibilities real quick we can mention? Yeah.
Yeah, we do. And then, so I'll let you go ahead and cover this one, and then I'll talk about the last slide very, very quickly because of time here.
Well, in class, we went through this image to the far right is the image of taxes or offering to the church. So we got to remember there was really a 1/10 rule going twice. So you really were doing 20% of everything you had. 1/10 went to your noble above, so the knight or to the lord, and then 1/10 went to your church. So that is like it's a law, but it's also like a responsibility. One of the laws was this idea of taxes. You have to pay taxes. But as you begin to look at the laws, you're going to find some really cool things. One, when you look at the rights, you're going to find that peasants have very few rights, if any. This is one example of the spurs. The right of spurs was a right that was only allowed for the nobility upwards. So a knight, a noble, or king could wear spurs. And I guess if you think about that, that's because they were the only people who were really allowed to ride horses. So the spur is an object that was used to move the horse forward. If a peasant were to wear spurs, then they are technically breaking the laws or the laws of medieval society and could ultimately be killed for that. You're going to read about lots of rules. The right of treasure, so a treasure ship, the right of wood, the right of hunting. You know, there are all these rights you can read about, but unfortunately, very few of them apply to the peasants. They really tell the peasants what they can't do. So there aren't very many rights for the peasants. They're more like laws that they must abide. The other thing is their system of justice was very different from ours. They didn't necessarily have trials and courts like we do today. There weren't juries. They did something called trials by ordeals. And you might want to read about these. You'll find them pretty interesting. You know, this particular ordeal is trial by fire. And then this one is trial by water. And you can read a little bit more about those to see what it's like. What are the ordeals? How did you prove you were innocent or guilty of a crime that may have been committed? And I think that this is interesting. They can really have a lot of fun looking at this and finding out more about the rights and laws of medieval society. It wasn't like today, we'll say it that way.
Yeah, and I've got a little video that I'll put on the students for tomorrow that the students can watch about that, the trial by water, which is pretty neat. The students typically like looking at. So, cool. All right. So the next slide, the last slide is feudalism spreads in 3 ways. Probably the one way is through war, and the best example would be William the Conqueror. Make sure you guys look that up a bit so you can look into that, and you'll find some interesting things there. The second is by marriage. So we talked about it a little bit in class the other day. When a king would have, you know, a son or a daughter, then they would marry the son or daughter of another king, and then that's kind of how you end up merging two manners, and that's how feudalism kind of spreads, and the whole concept of this interdependent lifestyle spreads that way. And then the church plays a role in helping the spread as well. You know, one way is that they themselves have a manor and have a lot of land and a lot of wealth, so they're able to kind of spread their influence that way as well. I'm gonna try to cut it a little short here. So, Mr. Holman, do you have anything to add before we?
I'll just add one quick thing. I think the kids can see from what we did in class with the role playing why the church might like feudalism, why it's a benefit for the church. And I think if they think back to what we did in class in our role playing, they'll understand why the church would want to see feudalism spread across more of Europe. And I think we can leave it at that. So I think we'll end this quest by saying, you know, we started with the idea of the song Staying Alive, you know, and maybe that is like a theme for this first part of the quest. The whole purpose of feudalism was to protect the people, to help them, to give them a chance to stay alive when what they're living through is the Dark Ages, the Vikings, the barbarian raids and pillaging that's occurring throughout Europe. So it's their first chance to make life a little bit better, and they choose feudalism. And we'll see how it works out as we progress through the quest.
Sounds good.
All right, well, have a good night.
You too.